I'm here with Blair. How you feeling right now, Blair?
Oh, I'm fine. I'm really enjoying the day. There's a lot of people here in support of reform. It's a strange thing that if you actually go back in cannabis law reform in New Zealand, we had the world's first cannabis party called the Marijuana Party. It started way back in 1974-75, of which I'm a proud member. I actually still have my membership card. But one of the things that really sort of, how could I put it, remains unresolved around the cannabis issue, despite the fact that we've had both the Greens, we've had the New Zealand Party, they were broadly in support, and of course Top Party currently, another one in support. It shouldn't surprise people to think that the debate is yet unresolved, because those parties still hold that view. That hasn't changed, even though the referendum missed by a small amount. But the whole question of the referendum, the conduct was absolutely miserable and downright criminal in my view, right? I'm not sure if you heard the conversations earlier, but the appeal process that was legitimised in the legislation was denied us, and that was fundamentally wrong. We were cheated, and the politicians are yet to release a report on the conduct of the referendum. They're hiding it. That's what happens when you don't do something for years. That was 2020. This is coming up to another election, and we still don't know why the referendum result was such as it was. Right? That's an obligation in breach of our political rights. If you want to spend money having a referendum, gain out of it what we can. Yes, it lost by a small amount. It lost by less than the population of Gore.
Do you have any personal thoughts as to why, like demographics perhaps?
Well, there was some fundamental flaws in the referendum documentation at in the electoral voting places, and that was the information about what parties were running wasn't visible, wasn't accessible to people, so they couldn't actually go and find out about their candidates and all that sort of stuff. That wasn't posted out to a lot of people as well. I mean, when I say most in New Zealand never got that posted out, right? It was obtainable, but you had to ask for it, right? And if you went to an electoral office and asked for it, they'd say, because I went to multiple, as soon as I realised they weren't available, right, I went to multiple electoral offices and said I'd like to find out who to vote for. They should have had that information there. But I'm told one of the reasons they didn't have it there is on display is right in the middle. The Aotearoa legalised cannabis party was front and centre with a big green leaf in the middle. Now, that's just fate. That's got nothing to do with, right? But you've got to have a good reason to not give that out. Can you think of a better reason that they could come up with than, we didn't print enough?
Yeah, it doesn't really cut the mustard.
It's wrong. It's wrong. Other things about the referendum, the documentation itself, when you actually went to cast a vote, right? Remember, this was R20, right? The cannabis R20. So anybody who is 18 now is effectively voting for nothing, right? Nobody ever discussed this, right? We put in a whole lot of scientists to advise us and things like that. 3 of them I know smoke, and still do, right? Which is a good thing, right? A good thing in the sense that you want people there knowledgeable, but they couldn't actually say to their own committee that I've used cannabis, right? That's not science. That's corruption. When something's illegal, it alters the outcome simply because it's still illegal. So one of the things when a young person went in to vote, the first thing he's presented with is of his choice of parties to vote for and all that sort of stuff, right? And his candidates, right? But before he gets that right, he has to fill in the form that entitles him to vote. He has to tick some boxes. He has to put his name, he has to put his address, and he has to put his date of birth, which is checked, right? Because if you put that in wrong, you could have made an error, you could have misspelled your name, right? Or you could have got your address wrong because they had the old address and they need to check it up. All that is done, right? But if you get your birthday wrong, you lose the right to vote because you just lied, right? Here's the thing. Underneath that was 2 more questions. The questions were, what is your email address? And what is your cell phone number? This is on the electoral form. If you didn't fill one in, you may not have seen it, but it was there. On an electoral form, it had the questions that were compulsory. Tick, tick, tick. These ones are compulsory. You must answer those. These ones wouldn't have had that because they were not compulsory. If you get a photocopy of the electoral form, and I have one, right? I wish I had it with me, right? The boxes of which boxes you had to tick was removed. Now you were expected to answer all of them. If you're 18 and a cannabis smoker, fuck you.
Do you think that was done intentionally?
I can't say whether it was done intentionally. I can say it was done incompetently. Intention suggests by design. That suggests that multiple people had to agree, because this form is reviewed by the Electoral Commission before it ever goes out to anybody, or certainly should be. If they didn't, then they're culpable as well, right? But it's ironic that when we appealed the referendum, we had the rights under the legislation to do so. 350 Christchurch citizens signed up to that. We only needed 200, right? But we wanted to make sure that in case somebody didn't quite tell I live at this address, fudge, that was well and truly covered. So we submitted that, and we went to the High Court. We had $1,000 with us to pay a bond that we thought might need to be paid. They told us we didn't need to pay it, right, etc. And the story goes on, and it goes like this. Being denied that process, we argued for a review of the process, not about the conduct of the High Court. And we won the right to ask the judge why this occurred, right? And in the short form, he said it was above his pay grade, right? Because he knew we were right, but he couldn't really solve the problem of what to do about it, right? So what he did is he held what they call sine die to another day, right? Which means it still had to be dealt with. Here's the irony. In the time that we filed on the Thursday at 4 o'clock, the Electoral Commission was advised, because the government services have to advise the Electoral Commission that it's being appealed, as it were, right? Judicial review, right? They went to the Crown Law, who then went to a private law company that often works with Crown Law, who then come up with the argument, but they never paid the $1,000 deposit. They never they had the opportunity within 48 hours to tell us we needed to pay it. Remember, we are on record, because it's all filmed in when you go to the High Court. Nothing gets fucking missed here, right? We said, is there anything to pay? And they looked and they double-checked. They went back and said, seemingly no. So it was the High Court's incompetence at that level which should have been being addressed. And we had said the opportunity to overturn the decision based on a legislative error in the conduct of the High Court, right, overrules the legislative error of our mistake, right? What happened was this courageous judge forced this to go to what's called a get the right word right, I had a stroke and it'll come up with me. A tripartite decision of 3 judges. It's like the Supreme Court in the US of A, dominant. 2 judges say yes, 1 says no, that one doesn't count. It's still a decision, right? It takes it out of being black and white. Means that they've had to talk about it, right? So the upshot of it is that our case was put before 3 of the highest judges in New Zealand. This is like the Privy Court, right? We made the case. And we argued that this needed to be reversed because it was an injustice to fail to do so. That it wasn't of our making, right? That we are here to resolve that in the best way possible, right? They ruled without any further discussion with us. 3 women, one who just got the Order of New Zealand, right? They ruled against us. We never got a review of the referendum. We never got the opportunity to say to the Electoral Commission, but this, right?
Was it all because of that 48 hours, that fee that wasn't paid?
We were denied, even though we had said, is there anything to pay? And we had the money there, right? Now, they could have, and one of the elements to that is they could have said, well, if you don't have the money, what security can you offer? I could have signed my car over. There are other things that they could. It was never about the amount of money or the ability to do it. It's the High Court fucked up, right, in the interpretation of the Act itself. They said that, and it was ironically a guy who was a criminal for years, Arthur Thomas is his name. The guy he lives down in Dunedin. He's now a lawyer, but not admitted to the bar because he's got a conviction for murder or something, I can't remember. But he's qualified, and he was one who filed in the court, right, not wishing for it to proceed, so he could say, as a litigant, I've filed against you, right? And he never paid the $1,000, so it lapsed, right? Completely wrong reasons for deciding on a case like ours, which is about a national issue, not about whether he was using the court for his own ends, right? They call it a litigious litigant, right? He hounded the court all the time, right? And to be fair, he is a very interesting man. But this was a legitimate case, right? And New Zealand was denied this. And I've told MPs, nothing. We're going with, the referendum was held and the yes vote lost, and that's how it remains. We have no intention of reviewing the law, despite the fact that current polls put it up there at 66% now, which means it would pass, right?
Why the hesitancy from the MPs, do you think? Are they just afraid to put off their voter base of older, perhaps, demographic?
That's a really good question. I'd like to say it's just because they're anally retentive, but that's letting them away with it, right? The actual fact is it's incompetence and kowtowing to higher powers, right? They're told, no, leave it to Chloe, right? That kind of stuff, And look, Chloe's doing an amazing job. She's doing the best she can. I still would hire to a higher standard on this issue, right? Despite the fact that I applaud as far as she's got, because she's speaking out where others aren't. But it's 120 members in the House. You've got to have 60 of them on your side to change the law. Here's the thing. Peter Dunn changed the law, right, after he was anointed with the poison chalice of being the drug czar, right, in post-2008 election, right? John Key became elected, right? And I don't know if you heard me speaking about it, but we lobbied for it, got it, right? 5 pages. One was the index, the last page was the explanatory note, 3 pages of legislation that fixed everything about drug policy safer than alcohol. Right? It was called the Restricted Substances Regulations. You can find them on the internet still, right? But it was 3 pages, and when it was described to somebody who has standing on a global scale, Professor David Nutt, right? Competent.
I know the man.
Yep. Neurologist, specialist in brain science, all that sort of stuff. Question here in the ironically named Rolleston Theatre, which is at the med school here, right? I'm not sure if you're aware, but Rolleston was the doctor in the UK that came up with what was called the British method, which is how you dealt with drugs before they were all made illegal. It was up to doctors to decide, and it was called the Rolleston method. Well, he happened to be speaking in the Rolleston Theatre for completely different names, but what a lovely coincidence, right? Yeah. He was speaking there, and I asked him, because it was 2009, and he knew about the legislation having passed, right? He also knows Peter Dunn and Jim Anderton and all those players really well. But he was asked in front of that audience of doctors after he was giving a speech, he was asked what was his thoughts about the restricted substance regulations, and was it something that informed the debate? And his words were, I wish I'd thought of them myself. And when asked, right, I got that round the wrong way. He said, when asked, he said, world-class legislation. Simple, erudite, concise, and entirely workable, right? And then he said, I wish I'd thought of them myself. Now, this is from a top UK advisor, head of the drugs debate in UK. Dismissed because he said the horse riding was more dangerous than ecstasy.
And this legislation was for all drugs safer than alcohol, not just cannabis.
So it never mentioned the word cannabis, right? And some MPs could be forgiven in many respects for not doing that. But when you don't ask, the media doesn't ask us, that conversation never occurs. And that's where the complicit media relationship with police occurs. This is critical to the resolution of the debate. And it's been identified in academic papers. AUT in Auckland, Alas did a brilliant one on this over methamphetamine. Right, there was a glowing example. I had a top cop out from England on a speaking tour, and we're in not Taranaki, up that way. Front page of the newspaper, Waikato Times, right? All about methamphetamine bust and how it's 36 paragraphs on the front page with a photograph, right? A lead story. It's all about how methamphetamine is bad, but when you get down to here and the doctor is asked, he says, well, it's actually not much of a problem. Right? See what I'm getting at? The weighting of media on this issue, this was an exemplar example, not quoted in that academic paper, I might add. She did that independent research. This was just a brazen example, and it happened to be a top cop from England, right? Retired Chief Superintendent Eddie Allison, right? Chief Detective Superintendent Eddie Allison, head of Royal Security, head of Heathrow Airport, brought Ronald Biggs home from Barbados. This guy is totally knowledgeable. He himself has been a legaliser. He actually told me a wonderful story as how when the big LSD bust in the south of Wales occurred, which was how some of the big outdoor festivals and were funded by the LSD that had been sold, right? And they were very generous, right? There's a New Zealand connection to that story, which I won't go into, but it's worth researching. But the decision was made to bust this place, and it was his job as a new policeman to drive it back to London. It was in a briefcase. It's LSD that had been made by an expert in organics, right? There's a New Zealand connection. It's a very prominent New Zealand connection because I think it was him that worked out how to do it. Before that, you had to get rye and you had to get a right bloody yeast growing on it and then extract it out of it. And the best you'd get would be, if you're really good, 20% LSD. Sitting having a coffee in Oxford somewhere, in exchange over a tabletop and out on the back of the recipe. I think you'd do it this way. Try that. 99.9% LSD pure, right? A briefcase, this is 1972, I think it was, right? A briefcase sitting in a police car. He's driving back to London and he's thinking, how much is that worth? I can tell you. Back then, it was £150 million worth. Can you imagine what it'd be worth today? And we rack our, gnash our teeth and fucking wax lyrical about them finding cocaine floating out at sea. This has not got worse. This has got terribly worse. We're not even honest about it, right? The methamphetamine story, right? One of my dear friends is a retired doctor, right? One of my other friends is a retired female doctor. No, she's still working, sorry. A female doctor. She is an expert in treating people that come into the women's prison. She can treat a methamphetamine in that context within 7 days and they're okay, right? Because she gives them methamphetamine. You're not allowed to do that now, right? We used to do that with heroin. We would give them heroin and monitor it. Now we give them methadone. It's just crap by comparison, right? But we've lost how to do stuff that protects the public health. Yet we have a law that creates deviancy, right? It amplifies deviancy. If you want a classic example, look at the shooting up in Napier. He smoked pot, right? They had to bring in a fucking armed bloody troop carrier with a cannon on it to deal with him and then kill him, right? That cop would have been, I remember his name, it'll come to me. He'd be having Christmas with his kids this year, probably celebrating their university entrance. We didn't need to go and send cops into this situation. It creates what we call deviant amplification, right? We have got drug policy so sadly bad when the likes of our sister city, Seattle, not only goes medpot, but goes full recreational, right? And nobody's coming to any harm here, right? Well, I'm behind some of those movements, and I'm proud to have said I've been at the front end of some of those movements in the United States. I'm a founding member of Educators for Sensible Drug Policy, which has had an influence in Canada changing the law. But I've also campaigned in California, Connecticut. I've been an activist, right? When Seattle changed, and I went to our own community councils, community boards, and said, our sister city changed the rules. Should we invite somebody out and have a conversation about this? The windows go down. I am officially banned, when I say I was ejected from the organisation Healthy Christchurch for having views on cannabis. Who are the sponsors? They're fucking alcohol companies, Lion bloody breweries.
That'll do it.
Right? It's the, what is it called, the Lion something trust. It funds this shit. Ngāi Tahu, the police, ECAN, City Council, all are members of this, along with Community Hub and Public Health. One of my friends, a very dear friend of mine, Professor of Education in California, post the law reform, wrote a book. It's basically how to educate kids, right? And it's got a wonderful title. I'll see if I can get it right. It's about credible drug education, enabling credible drug education. And I took some copies to Community and Public Health and said, along with all your other health promotion stuff, here's, da-da-da. No, they wouldn't put it in the community library. I took 4 copies to the Christchurch library, right? Knowing that this is important. Now, the Christchurch Library, to thank them, they've got lots of books about cannabis. There's a new one, Stephen Anderson's book that's just come out about the Raurimu, his involvement pre and post the Raurimu massacre, and that'll be interesting reading. It's called The Devil's Haircut, and if you don't know what the Devil's Haircut is, that's worth understanding alone, right? It answers the question so well. Stephen Anderson was a very, very good guy. His letters I've read. His letters to my friend Kevin I've read. And you think, what a nice guy. Erudite, concise and well-spoken, right? He was put in a shit fucking situation, right? And this is where we call it deviancy amplification occurs, right? When the rule of law is challenged by somebody and a family is saying, but you've got a mental health problem, you can't smoke cannabis, right? You're disappointing your dad, right? There's where the pressure came from, right? He shot 6 people. He's deadly sorry about it, but thankfully he was ruled insane at the time. That was the right decision, a courageous judge, really, really a courageous judge. But we wrote to the judge, and I think that might have had a play in the outcomes. I really do, because there would have been nobody with our view on it that was our view, right? I'm confident it may have had, I'm confident it may have had an influence. But when we look at these circumstances, the Napier one is a classic example. Deviancy amplification. Now that we're going to be stopping young people driving around the streets, right, and if they've got any pot in their car, right, and they may have smoked a bit, drug test. Fuck, I'm going to lose my car. Oh, fuck, I'm going to have, that buggers my relationship with the world. My girlfriend's going to leave me. All that stuff. I'm talking about real life kind of stories. He's going to put his foot to the metal and other people are now going to be hurt. Either the members in the car that are there for the ride or somebody innocent on the outside. These are innocent too. So's he. This wouldn't have happened. And yet there is no legitimate basis for the drug testing on cannabis because it cannot prove impairment. And as long as we accept impairment with alcohol, we accept it because we know it, right? You can drink alcohol and go, I just fucked up, right? You wouldn't want to drive. But it gives you balls. It gives you the inability to make executive decisions. Cannabis does not. Cannabis does not impact on your ability to make executive decisions. It doesn't stop people from making wrong decisions. That's not changing. But you're going to get less wrong decisions. See what I mean? Oh, I'm a bit fucking ripped to take you home. Just stay the night. That's going to be what happens. And that's what happens now. If we were conscientious about road safety, we would legalise cannabis yesterday. It displaces alcohol. Right? Where does it displace alcohol? In the very at-risk group we're trying to help. The people under 30 years of age who have excess capital and more time and think they'll get laid more. Right? And it works both sides. I've seen the girls down at... If you tell me that they're drinking to feel good, ask me this. Why do they wear such short dresses? Right? I'm linking this. Right? And you've got to have balls today to say this, because this is contrary to mainstream thinking. You'll get somebody say, oh, you're against women, oh, they can wear whatever they like, you sexist bastard. And I go, if you're concerned about sexism, you'd change drug laws tomorrow. Right? It is males who wear the biggest burden, and then females who cop it, because we can't get a mortgage on our house. We can't bloody well get a job with international implications. We can't travel, right?
Because of complications with cannabis, with the law.
I can't go to the United States because I've got a Class B. It wasn't even mine. I told the judge. I didn't even know it was there. But I'm not to believe. The judge said all druggies are liars. He actually said those words. Right? I wasn't there. It was a friend who dropped over. I play mandolin. I played at his birthday party on the Saturday. I didn't even go home. I went to my girlfriend's place. Why wouldn't I? Right? And on Monday he dropped in to thank me and left a wee block of hash on the top beside my bed. Unsolicited. I didn't ask for it. I didn't know it was there. If you don't know something, under law, you're not guilty of something. But the judge can say, yeah, but you're just lying.
What did they say? All druggies are liars.
Those exact words.
That is problematic, to use a modern...
Oh, we had it with the case of Neville Yates, the guy that it was spoken about earlier. He passed away. Thankfully, he was allowed cannabis and the police stopped busting him. But he'd been put in jail multiple times over nothing more. He's in a wheelchair. They sent 13 cops to go and arrest a guy in a wheelchair, and they had 4 of them over the back fence like he was going to throw his wheelchair over the top and make his getaway. They lied. I was this Mackenzie's friend. The court case was 2 days, right? I was this Mackenzie's friend. Now, he'd been run over by a sheep truck. He had steel panels in here, steel up in here. His leg was amputated later because he couldn't put up with the pain, but he still had the pseudo pain. You know, he thinks his leg's there and it hurts. He smoked cannabis because it was a relief, right? But he drank alcohol because it was social, and that was completely different, right? But he'd passed away, was it the year before last? I still have his jacket. He left me his fur coat. That's a nice touch, right? It shows I had a relationship with him. But when Neville was busted, right, and he went to jail, the police lied to the judge. They first of all said that the plants were hydroponic. No, they weren't. The photographs showed them in pots with dirt, right? Then they said they were sophisticated. I'd asked through, as a Mackenzie's friend, right, I'd ask what to find them as being sophisticated, right? What does that mean? Oh, they were being hidden. They were in a cupboard underneath his sink with a 100-watt light bulb. He was cooking them, right? Not only that, they lied about hydroponic. They said it was sophisticated. They said they were mature, right? So again, written the questions out for Neville to ask, right, as best he could. He asked the cop, in what way were they, could you determine that they were mature? And he said, oh, well, we're trained to identify, right? Excuse me, Your Honour, I need to speak to Neville, right? Neville, you need to ask the question, right? Did they have flowers and seeds? Neville, did they have flowers and seeds? He said, you can look at the photograph because the evidence was there. They were this high. They still had their cotyledon leaves on, the little wee leaves that grow first off the seed, right? They lied. I called it MASH. Mature, I can't remember what the A was, sophisticated and hydroponic. They lied on 4 different things, right?
They're using buzzwords, aren't they? Meaningless.
They testy lie. And the police have been doing this for years. They testy lied when they were undercover. They had to. They weren't allowed to say in the court that they'd smoked cannabis. But if they hadn't smoked cannabis, they could have died because these guys would have dealt to them.
It makes really clear that the deviancy amplification, the heavy hand of the law coming down.
The top cop that did the LSD bust, right, the one I was telling you about, I had him out here for a tour, and I asked him about his role with cannabis. Not only was he the instigator of the liberalisation of cannabis in London itself, he got a top gay policeman because he was really good at communicating. He, Paddock was his name, he spoke for the cannabis issue in this area and said, we're simply not enforcing in this area. It is a bit of a social experiment. We just expect the public to respect the fact that this is a non-enforcement area. People are smoking cannabis there. If we wanted to go and bust them all, the bloody prisons would be full. We don't want that situation. It's an experiment to see how it goes. And they did. It was largely successful, right? But here's the other side of his story. He wanted to balance that against what might occur if he changed the shape of that experiment. And what he said was, next big meeting of his boys, look, we're getting reports of problematic behaviour down at Milton Keynes. And of course, Milton Keynes is quite uppity sort of an area, There's sort of kind of 2 roads in off 2 state highways, right? It's a community, right? And of course, they go out and they increase the enforcement. What happens is they're busting a few people that they've pulled over for cannabis, and the media are blowing it up that Milton Keynes has gone to bloody hell in a handbasket, right? And he quite rightfully said, stop! There's no more cannabis there now than there ever was. He realised the error of his ways, and that's why he joined this organisation, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. It's now got it's still LEAP, but it's got they changed it to something positive rather than against, right? But the message is exactly that. Right? When I had top cops, including a guy who was undercover for 16 years in Brooklyn, New York, right? Soprano country, 13 years. They trumped the case up. They had a murder. They had witnesses. They had everything there that never happened. And he was acquitted for some obscure reason that, he got off. And that gave him cred. And he infiltrated what I'd call the networks, broadly. For 16 years. He got married undercover. Because this woman fell in love with him. And he could, she was a fabulous jazz pianist. Famous in New York jazz pianist, right? And having her in the fold gave him credibility as well, but the police had said, we'll support you. Well, he had to come out of his marriage, right, out of his undercover, and tell his wife that he wasn't who she thought he was.
Brutal.
That's deviancy amplification. It occurs on both sides of the ledger. It's not right that we continue to do this, right, and it remains untold. When you have the likes of Family First and Sam NZ, who are self-funded, right? In other words, they got money to do the things. They paid for all that advertising. They paid for the radio and they paid for the TV and they paid for the big signs, right? But when Normal put up a sign that said cannabis is medicine, they were ordered to take it down because they said it's not true. And you can't advertise an untruth. For fuck's sake, Jesus was born again is an untruth in my mind, right? We don't challenge these things in the right way, and we just let these things lie. Oh, well, the court decided. Oh, well, it's bigger than me. I got to mow my lawns this afternoon. So the injustices are continuing to occur. It's no easier now. In fact, in some respects, it's harder because people actually think, oh, but they've gone soft on cannabis. Didn't you hear them? They said that they just take it off people as long as people are not being assholes, right? Yeah, they take it off you if you're white and male in Wellington. But if you're brown and walking in the street in Porirua, you're for it. And the statistics back me up. It's not just a little bit. It's 4-1. They're overrepresented in the numbers, 4-1. Because there's more of us than there is of them, right? And if they're 4 times the number being busted, it's a sacrilege, right? But when I describe the law as being not only ageist, right? It targets young people, right? There's no evidence that older people are smoking less. The evidence is we're smoking more today than we were 10 years ago. I'm saying, I'm lucky, I'm 69 this year, right? 68 is do it to me and I'll owe you one, right? So you've got to see this in, when I say it's useful having 50 odd years of experience of doing this. I was witness to a bust. I'd been to the house. I'd left. A bust had occurred. I come back and they thought I'd narked on them. The guy who had the big sort of V8-powered Ford Transit with big fat tyres on the back, a few tattoos, took issue with this because he thought I had narked. There's an interesting word, narcotic.
Narcotic officer.
Yeah, I'd narked on him. Well, he was bigger than me. He was a prick, right? Just by nature, right? But he took to me. And I had my eyes in front of the corrugated iron on the letterbox, right? Where he was threatening to gouge my eyes out. What he didn't know was I was really good at judo. Yes, I got the better of him. But I didn't realise until I was 36 years old when I suddenly realised that that had really had a deep and compelling influence on me. And it's part of the reason why I fight the fight. Right? I was interviewed on Radio Rima one time when I happened to be in Auckland, and they gave a wonderful interview, right? And he said to me, but Blair, why do you dedicate yourself to this cause? And I says, it's a bastard of a calling. People in the Christian movement all over New Zealand heard that. It's a bastard of a calling. And I reckon if I wrote a book about all this, I would still say it's a bastard of a calling.
I think it's a good place to wrap it up. We don't have much room left. Thank you, Blair. You're a wealth of knowledge. Appreciate that.